Hello, my lovely listeners and viewers. Once again, welcome to my channel, Literature Made Simple. And as I always start my lesson with, we are on a journey to try to comprehend literature, to try to make literature look simpler than it seems or less challenging than people think it is. So far, we have been looking at the basics before we can delve into proper literary analysis, before we can delve into some poems, some novels, some dramatic works, we have to acclimatize ourselves with the basics of what literature is all about. So we've been looking at various meanings, various forms, various types of literature. In our last lesson, we looked at what I termed some examples of literature, as you can see on the screen now, where we looked at the meanings of elegy, the meanings of dirge, eulogy, lullaby, villanelle, epigram, limerick. Today, I want us to start with what makes literature and what makes poetry fun, interesting. That is, some devices. You know, poetry or literature, just like any other subject or forms of writing, becomes unique when writers use some phrases, some sentences, some words to make their writing unique. You write, especially in poetry, you write what a prosaic will be or will look like. In other words, you write what a novelist will write, you write what a dramatist or playwright will write, but you do yours using some unique words, some unique phrases, some unique sentences that it will take people to think deeper, to comprehend or decipher what you are trying to do. Now, these devices, some people call them figurative devices, others call them literary devices, others call some of them sound devices. Now, I'll be looking at the devices in general, which are words, phrases, sentences that are used to enrich our poems, our writings in literature. Now, some of these devices are heavily reliant on sounds. In English language, we have the sound component, which is phonetics and phonology, where you are treated with the meanings of the various sounds in English, the vowel sounds or the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds, and how they are you blend them. So today we are going to look at some selected devices or uh, sound devices that are heavily reliant on these sounds to make our poems interesting and fun. Now, if you look on your screen now, the first sound device that I want us to look at or I want to take you through today is alliteration. Alliteration is one very common sound device that is widely used by poets, widely used by some novelists and some dramatists, even though they are predominantly used in poetry. Now, when we say alliteration, what does it mean? Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds, usually at the beginning of words. It is the repetition of the same consonant sound, usually or predominantly at the beginning of words in a sentence, in a phrase, in a poem, or any other piece of writing. Now, certain key things that you have to note to understand what alliteration means is that one, there is repetition. There is repetition. Now, there is no rule, there is no formula, if I could use that word here, that tells the number of times that a particular sound should be repeated to qualify to be an alliteration. There should be repetition. Now, once you hear the English word repetition, it means that that sound should appear more than once. So in alliteration, it could just be two words with the same sound repeated. Now, that is one main feature of alliteration. Another feature of alliteration that you have to note is that this repeated sound should be a consonant. English literally has 26 alphabets. Out of the 26 alphabets, we have five of them being vowel letters, and the rest 21, if my mathematics is right, being consonant letters. But when you look at the consonant sounds, it goes beyond just the consonant letters. There are some instances where uh, two different consonant letters could sound the same way, like the sound k. The k sound sometimes combines consonant letter C or consonant letter C. Other times it is consonant letter K. There are other times when it is even combination of consonants cluster CH and a lot. So the one in alliteration there should be repeated sound or repeated sounds. Two, the sound or sounds that are repeated should be consonants. Three, it does not matter where the sounds are repeated. When I say it does not matter where the sounds are repeated, what I mean is that they are not supposed to necessarily follow each other before you classify it as an alliteration. There is no straitjacket rule as to the distance between the sounds. But in a sentence or in a phrase, maybe the first letter and the first word and the second word could be or could possess a repeated same sound, or sometimes the first word at the beginning of the sentence and the last word at the beginning of the sentence, and it's still qualified to be an alliteration. So in short, in brief, what then is alliteration? It is the repetition of the same consonant sound, usually at the beginning. Very good. A very key element is that the sound repeated should mostly be the first sound of the word. The first sound of the word. When the lesson progresses in future classes, I will explain to you, because we have consonants also as a literary device or a sound device. So with alliteration, the word, the first letter of the word that whose sound we are considering to be repeated should be the same. So one, same sound. Two, repetition. Three, first letter. Usually, I'm emphasizing usually, because there are few instances or situations where the sound repeated may not necessarily be the first letter or the first letters, but it's still alliteration. Now let's look on the screen and look at some examples of alliteration. One, Enyo cooked cupcakes in the kitchen. Enyo cooked cupcakes in the kitchen. So what I did was to highlight the repeated sounds in red. Now, cooked has letter C. You remember I mentioned earlier that in alliteration, we are not looking at the repetition of the same letters. No. We have difference between consonant letters and consonant sounds. Here we are talking about the repetition of the same consonant sound. So in cook, the letter is C, but it sounds K. Then cupcake, also C sounding K. Then kitchen, K sounding K. So once there is the repetition of the same sounds, and these sounds are all consonants, and in this case they are all the first letters of the word, this statement or sentence is qualified to be classified as alliteration. Two, Franca had a free phone. So another very interesting sound. The sound is also interesting because it is not dependent on only the letter F. There are instances where PH could sound F. There are some instances where GH could also sound F. So to be able to identify statements that are alliteration or that are alliterative, I will entreat you to pay so much attention to the sounds, not the letters. In this case, free has letter F sounding F, and phone has consonant cluster of PH sounding F. So these two, since they have the same sound, regardless of the consonant letters that they entail, is also qualified to be an alliteration. Then the third one here, we have change the channel, the sound, which is also a consonant sound and not a consonant letter. So we have ch as in change CH and the channel also CH. So consonant clusters giving you a consonant, same consonant sound is an alliteration. There are different types of alliteration that you can come by online. Free flight from France, the repetition of the sound is alliteration. She sells seashells at the seashore has two different sounds repeated, the s and the sh sound, and each of them are qualified to be alliteration. Now, alliteration adds a kind of rhyme or rhythm to a poem or a piece of writing. The repetition adds a musical tone or a rhythmic tone to the piece of writing. If you have any question, you leave it in the comment and I'll respond to it. Our next sound device that I want us to look at is assonance. Assonance or assonance are or is the direct opposite of alliteration, if I could put it that way to make it a bit easier for your comprehension. When I say direct, what I mean is that alliteration is the repetition of the same consonant sound. Assonance is the repetition of the same vowel sound. So assonance has to do with the repetition of the same vowel sound. Now, unlike alliterations, assonance does not or is not heavily dependent on the position of the sound. The vowel sound can be in the middle, which is the most common one, usually in the middle of the word, but there are a few occasions where it could also be at the beginning. Then hopefully sometime you could find it at the end. Literature is a versatile subject, so writers with their poetic licenses could decide to play around that are heavily found in the middle of the word. So when the same vowel sound is repeated, we call it assonance. Now, we have vowel letters. I just want to mention this briefly. A, E, I, O, U. These are vowel letters. But when we talk about the vowel sound, it goes a little beyond the vowel letters because the vowel sound A alone can, the vowel letter, sorry, A alone can give you more than one vowel sound. Now we have some examples of assonance or assonances, or if I'm right to say that, by the way, on the screen. First one is son of the gun. Now here too, we have the sounds that qualifies these examples to be classified as assonance in red. You will notice in the first example that assonance, just like alliteration, is not dependent on letters. It is dependent on sound. So you need to read or pronounce the words, pay attention to the sounds that the vowels make before you can classify them to be assonance, just like we did under alliteration. So sun has vowel letter O sounding as A. Then gun has vowel letter U sounding as A. I think that should be the carrot A, the central vowel A. But since I'm not going so much into phonetics, I will not just bore you with that. Regardless of the letter, pay attention to the sound. So, sound of the gun, there's a repetition of the same vowel sound, ah, so it is assonance. 2, the cat is out of the bag. Here we have, unlike the first example, we have the same vowel letter giving us the same vowel sounds. So, repetition, assonance. Chips and dip. So sorry for that. The E or the I sounding E in deep and then the I sounding E in chips is what makes this example assonance. Good night, sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite. I love that. Good night. IGH sounding as I, the diphthong I. Then sleep tight, same IGH sounding as the diphthong I. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Here only E sounding as the diphthong I. So you notice that if you pay attention to letters like chips and dip, chips we have letter sounding E. Dip we also have I letter sounding E. Bite same I letter but now sounding as a diphthong I. Bite. I. Bite. So pronunciation or reading is key in determining these sound devices. Therefore, this is also, since the three words all have the same diphthong sound repeated in all of them, it is also assonance. Once again, if you have any question, you can leave it in the comment section for me. Then let's continue. Let's look at, so what I did here in today's lesson is to kind of look at the minimal pairs, sounds that are somehow similar or that are directly opposite. So we look at alliteration, repetition of the same consonant sounds. Then we look at assonance, repetition of the same vowel sounds. Now let's look at euphony and cacophony. Now, euphony is originally a Greek word, euphonos. I'm sure I'm right, euphonos, which means a pleased sound or pleasant sound. So basically, euphony is the repetition of pleasant sounds. The repetition of pleasant sounds, which adds like alliteration, rhythm, rhyme, and a kind of melody to the piece of writing. It makes it melodious. So the repetition of pleasant, melodious sounds. Now, these pleasant, melodious sounds are usually vowels and some consonants, but they are predominantly vowels. And even when you go to the vowels, mostly you encounter the long vowels. E, A, E, or the long vowels, but it is not limited to only the long vowels. So we have some examples on the screen. Seasons of mist and mellow fruitfulness. Close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless. This is an excerpt from a poem. And here we have the repetition of the long E, the short E, the vowel then friend maturing, the sound and load. So these are all pleasing to the ear. They are pleasing to the ear. So when I read it, seasons of mist and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless. It continues. It's so pleasant, it adds a lyrical or a musical tone and makes the poem or the piece of writing fun to read. It does not, one thing you should note about euphony or euphonous sounds is that they do not present disaster, they do not present unpleasant situations, they do not present unmelodious situations. No, everything, the picture, the imagery that you get, the symbol that they create when you look at euphonous sounds used in euphony or in a piece of writing is melodious, is pleasant, and is nice, beautiful, good. Now, contrasting with euphony is cacophony. Sharply contrasting with euphony is cacophony. Now, I'm using the word sharply because whilst euphony concentrates on pleasant sounds, melodious sounds, Cacophony concentrates on unpleasant and melodious sounds, sounds that are not pleasant to the ear, sounds that are not melodious, sounds that, when used together, create disastrous imagery, sounds that, when used together, creates unpleasant imagery in the mind's eyes of the readers. Then we are looking at cacophony. And these sounds are predominantly consonants. Sounds like k, p, d, g, z. Most of the voiced consonant sounds create this kind of unpleasantness, this kind of unmelodiousness. So we have some example there. Beware, beware the Jabberwock, beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. So without doing an appreciation of this piece or this couplet, I will just mention that you already have an idea of warning of trouble, warning from disaster. There's a tone of caution. B, j, b, j, b, k, k. These are the sounds that have been repeated in this couplet. And somebody is being warned to be careful of jaws that bite, of claws that catch. So I'm already thinking of a wild animal that can devour you, and you are being asked to be aware of that animal. That's the first imagery that you get when you read this. Even though when you go deeper, it may not necessarily be talking about a lion or a tiger. It may be talking about life situations or people around you. But first imagery, we learned about allegories, where we have surface meanings of poems and we have the deeper meaning. So this is about cacophony as well. Now, today we have looked at 4 key sound devices that writers, that poets use to enrich their writing. So you read the words, you understand the words, you try to get the meaning of the words to help you get the meaning of the writing. But sometimes you go beyond just the meaning of these words to pay attention to the blending of certain sounds and the message that those sounds helps the piece of writing to carry across to its readers. So we looked at alliteration, repetition of the same consonant sounds, usually at the beginning of words in a sentence or phrase. We looked at assonance, the repetition of the same vowel sounds, doesn't matter where in the word. We also look at euphony, the use or repetition of pleasant, melodious sounds. Then we also look at cacophony, which sharply contrasts with euphony because it is heavily reliant on the repetition of unpleasant and melodious consonant sounds or sounds. Because I'm using sounds because there are some times where maybe there may be some vowels, even though it is rare, but there's nothing that is impossible in poetry or in literature. Thank you for being with me today. I entreat you to listen attentively and note your questions in the comment section for me to respond to. In our next lesson, we'll continue with these sound devices. I will still bring a few more to your attention. Then when we are done with that, we could look at other figurative devices. Thank you. Goodbye.